When I started being a builder, my first step was I went and I bought a building site in Point Reyes. So I got a building permit and I put a trailer on my lot, and it contained all the things I absolutely needed. I absolutely needed a small kitchen and a place to bathe and a place to sleep, and a mobile home, a travel trailer this was, actually had all those bare essentials. And from there, the next thing I needed was some space. And for me, that was to build a deck out on the front. So that might be, a paradigm of development in which there's a core that you'll always need. You'll always need those basic things. But in certain times of life, you'll need other spaces. You'll need a workspace or a space for your kids, or space for your parents. And those needs are transitional.
But if they become a part, an integral part, stuck to the main house, the implications are very different than if they're separate dwellings.
That's right. If you can have these things be separate little, ideally on wheels, if that could be, it would involve some planning so that you'd have room to roll it in and roll it out. Mm-hmm. That's what we're providing. It's a building that has a legal use. Yeah. And one of our bigger users are elderly people who want to remain independent and can afford a small house and can get a use permit to put a small house on their lot, as long as they've got a letter from the doctor that they need some form of home care. So that's a legal breach in the dike of land use regulation.
So governments and individuals are really grappling with these issues right now.
Everybody would like it to be solved. Mm-hmm. But all the laws were created by us. We live in a democracy that works. We all voted all these laws in for the reasons, and it may be that the times are changing and we need to consider reorganizing the laws. The rules don't usually change. Usually civil behaviors change in the same way that people for the last 40 or 50 years have built illegal second units in their garages or basements to accommodate some family need. I imagine that people will start to make use of tiny houses or little houses or recreational trailers in ways that solve their family needs, and that the laws will probably come around to conforming in time. In my case, when my mom needed a place to stay, my brother and I just created an apartment for her, and we didn't spend our time fighting with the county because we're both builders and we knew where that would get us. So yeah, my core motive is, the passion is to provide for people's needs. And I regard, the regulations that, because of unintended consequences, impede those needs. Here's mom, she's got another 3 years to live. We can wait 2 years for our building permit, or we can build mom a thing and she can move in a couple months. So it's a more positive, let's satisfy the need. I started out building when I was 19 years old. I had always wanted to build my own house, is what motivated me. Grew up in the Navy, and we moved around a lot. And so I saw a lot of different houses and saw the furniture come in and out of boxes, and had my room in different places. And by the time I got to college, it was pretty clear that I wanted to design and build my own house. The first house that I built was a tent, a geodesic dome tent, that I would locate in the hills above Palo Alto, where I was going to school. And I could squat on people's land and move it around in my VW bus. And it was something that I really loved. I just loved the idea of having my own house. And I was doing things like studying yoga and doing an exercise. How little can I live on? I'd like have a package of, how cheap can my thing be? Can I live with 2 pairs of jeans and 2 t-shirts, and can I live out of a VW Bug? Those nomadic structures that I built early on were just full of promise for me. I never had a desire to build a palace. I was always excited by things that were affordable. I went on to become a builder in Marin County, designing and building houses, becoming a specialty cabinet maker, and increasingly furnishing fancier and larger houses as the years went on. My generation went from growing up in sensibly sized 14 to 1,800 square foot houses to living in unsensibly sized 3,000 to 5,000 foot houses. It's a trend that I found disillusioning. I so wish that we had been more successful in our generation, promoting, the agenda of sustainability. Sorry that that didn't happen. For the last 3 years, I've returned to my initial love, which is affordable, portable buildings. I love the idea of something that's in a scale that's intimate and something that is providing what's necessary. There's a rightness about it to me. What I mean is it feels like it fits. This little house that we're sitting in, I'd love to live in. I'm not living in it now because I've got a teenage daughter and an 11-year-old daughter, and they have a walk-in closet, and they each have their own sink. And I would not be the one to tell them that we're going to move into a tiny house. I would not be popular. It could be that a smart use of transitional buildings on wheels would be to move it in while it's needed for the teenagers, and then move it to grandma's house while it's needed there. Because there's always been this question of how do you adapt houses to changing needs, but they've always been additive and growing, and they've always left people in their retirement years with a house they don't need. My parents moved into an apartment in Palo Alto where they had rooms between apartments that could be purposed to either apartment. They could close off the wall and it would belong to, the apartment next door. There's a friend of mine who's just written a book about dividing houses up.
What's that?
It's called In-Laws, Outlaws, and Granny Flats. And he's addressed this whole question from another angle, which is you've got this big house and you only need half of it. Well, why not divide it in half? Just turn it into a duplex. So here we are. This is our most popular little house. We call it a room of your own. It's a very versatile little space, and what's nice about it is that it's legal almost anywhere to put this in your backyard.
If it were to have a kitchen or a bathroom in it?
That changes everything. These are legal for day use. They're intended as workshops, home offices, artist studios. Wherever you might have been thinking about building the $100,000 extra bedroom, you could come to us for the $20,000 room of your own. Scale is the issue. How can it be little and feel graceful? So it's the ergonomics, it's how far you reach, how tall you are, where there's clearance, you need room to pull out your chair. As you're sitting down at the table, there's got to be plenty of room for everything to work. So it's a question about just studying all these minimum things that they have in the architectural books, allow this much space for this and that. And I try to conform to that rather than pinch them, the way boats, they'll just really crowd them down.
Actually, square footage doesn't affect the total cost that much if it's totally finished, does it?
Well, the interesting thing happens with square footage, and one of the reasons that there was the rise of the McMansion is that there are certain getting started costs,
Right.
and there are expensive parts of the building, and then the cheap part of the building is the size of the building. Relatively cheap.
Down the line.
Yeah, so that's what's led to the growth of this huge thing. And in this is actually our best value here. The office that we were in that didn't have a bedroom, and it didn't have a loft, and it didn't have a big kitchen, cost about the same because it had a bunch of expensive detailing in it. There weren't IKEA cabinets, there were handmade cabinets, and there weren't Home Depot windows, there were handmade windows. And it wasn't a bamboo floor, it was a recycled antique Douglas fir floor. This one is 384 square feet on the ground floor, and there's a 121 square foot loft up there. So it's about 500 square feet if you count the loft space. We're building what's called a recreational park trailer, and it's governed by a set of rules that we conform to. And the maximum size of that is 400 square feet. And it's a building that you're supposed to use temporary and seasonally.
And should the laws change and you could put it on the ground, you could build a foundation under it and it would be a house, I suppose?
Could be. I think that's probably the least likely scenario.
Yeah.
The reason being that when they put a house on the ground, they need to be able to inspect it for public safety purposes. This has been inspected for public safety as a recreational trailer. There are people from Elkhart, Indiana that send field reps out here and they inspect us to make sure that we're conforming with the Manufacturers Association rules. Okay. Once it's all put together, you can't inspect the mechanical systems any longer.
Okay.
Right. So you can't just put this on a foundation and call it a house, not legally. You know, I think the key to it is really going to be land use, you know, because we've got the buildings right here. The group that meets here periodically that's exploring the campground option, that's kind of a shoe in the door. It's sort of an incremental approach, is because the model's got to get created. You know, the housing's here. It's how can we create a land use model so that a person, say, that was 30 years old and planning a family and planning to buy a house could look at, you know, a $150,000 option to buy a site in a campsite with a little house on it. That's the missing part of the puzzle right now. Is everybody's got the idea and we know how to build it, we know how to imagine it and envision it, but to actually implement it, we've got to get a land use development plan that can be approved.